of course. Here is the paraphrased script, maintaining the original tone, style, and narrative flow while slightly altering the word order and structure. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Music. Blood and power. These were the twin obsessions that defined the reign of Henry VIII. During those final winter days of 1547, as his swollen body lay rotting from within, England's most notorious king faced his mortality with the same ruthless calculation that had seen him execute 2 wives and countless enemies. "The lion is dying," courtiers whispered behind closed doors. But his claws remained sharp until the end. This grotesque finale was decades in the making, beginning with a handsome, athletic prince renowned across Europe for his charm and vigor. How did this Renaissance golden boy become the monstrous tyrant gasping for breath in the candlelit chambers of Whitehall Palace? The answer lies not merely in his infamous marriages, but in a series of medical catastrophes that would twist his mind and body beyond all recognition. By January 1547, the man who had once jousted with Christendom's finest knights was barely recognizable. His body had become a battlefield of afflictions. His legs were riddled with suppurating ulcers that emitted a stench so foul courtiers struggled not to vomit in his presence. Mechanical devices were now required to move his enormous bulk, which some accounts suggest had expanded to nearly 400 pounds. His once handsome face had grown bloated and distorted, the eyes sunken deep into flesh that had taken on a sickly yellow hue. The royal physicians had exhausted their limited arsenal of remedies. Bloodletting, herbal concoctions, and prayers all proved futile against the cocktail of ailments consuming their sovereign. Most modern historians believe Henry suffered from type 2 diabetes, gout, and possibly osteomyelitis, a painful bone infection that would explain the chronic agony in his legs. More troubling was the king's mental deterioration. His legendary temper had worsened into explosive rage episodes, interspersed with periods of confused lethargy. Yet even as death approached, the politics of succession consumed the royal court. The king's third wife, Jane Seymour, had finally provided him with a male heir, the frail 9-year-old Edward, but powerful factions were already positioning themselves to control the boy after Henry's death. The conservative Catholic faction led by the Duke of Norfolk competed against the reformist Protestants under Edward Seymour, the young prince's uncle. Henry, paranoid to the end, was acutely aware of these machinations, signing execution orders even as he struggled to hold a pen. The king's rapidly declining health remained one of the realm's most closely guarded secrets. Royal proclamations continued to describe Henry as hale and hearty, while reality told a far different story. Those permitted into the royal sick room encountered a macabre scene, the immense royal bed draped in dark fabrics, the sickly sweet smell of decay barely masked by burning incense, and at the center, the mountainous form of a man who had once symbolized England's vigor. Palace workers whispered of hearing the king's screams echoing through Whitehall's stone corridors. Henry's leg ulcers caused him such excruciating pain that even the slightest movement could trigger paroxysms of agony. His physicians applied poultices containing everything from boiled onions to powdered human skull, desperate remedies that only added to his suffering. More effective was the liberal application of opium, which dulled the king's pain but further clouded his already deteriorating mind. The psychological torment matched the physical. Henry had once been England's most feared man, his word literally life or death for any subject. Now he found himself helpless against the betrayal of his own flesh. Court records indicate increasingly erratic behavior, moments of near delirium when he would ramble about the ghosts of executed rivals or call out for long-dead wives. In more lucid periods, the king obsessively reviewed his will, determined to control his dynasty's future from beyond the grave. Contemporaries noted with alarm how the king vacillated between religious positions during these final days. Having broken from Rome to establish himself as head of the Church of England, Henry now seemed tormented by spiritual doubts. He would demand Catholic rituals one day, then reaffirm Protestant principles the next. His personal chaplain recorded how the king would awaken in terror from nightmares, claiming to have seen the faces of Thomas More, and Boleyn, and other victims of his reign standing at the foot of his bed in silent judgment. The king's impending death created a dangerous power vacuum that his courtiers rushed to fill. The Privy Council fractured into competing factions, each maneuvering to secure advantageous positions in the coming regency. Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, who had survived decades of court intrigue, now found himself outmaneuvered by the Protestant faction. In a final display of Henry's enduring ruthlessness, Norfolk was sentenced to death for treason in the dying king's name, though he would ultimately survive when Henry expired before the execution could be carried out. January 27, 1547, marked the beginning of Henry's final collapse. Witnesses reported that the king experienced a seizure so violent that attendants had to hold him down to prevent injury. When the episode passed, Henry struggled to speak, his right side partially paralyzed, clear evidence of what modern medicine would identify as a massive stroke. The court physicians, deeply aware that failing to save the king could result in their own disgrace or execution, worked frantically to revive their patient, applying hot irons to his skin and forcing bitter medicinal concoctions down his throat. Throughout this ordeal, access to the royal bedchamber remained strictly controlled by Henry's most trusted advisor, Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury. This secrecy served a practical purpose beyond mere dignity. News of the king's imminent death could trigger premature power grabs or even foreign invasion. Cranmer ensured that only the most essential attendants were permitted entry, and each was sworn to absolute silence regarding the monarch's condition. Even Queen Catherine Parr, Henry's sixth and surviving wife, was kept at a distance during certain critical periods. The king drifted in and out of consciousness as January turned to February. During brief periods of lucidity, Henry reportedly expressed growing terror about his imminent judgment before God. The man who had executed 2 wives, countless nobles, and thousands of common subjects now faced his own mortality with increasing dread. According to one attendant's diary, the king was heard mumbling prayers and begging forgiveness in his sleep, a stark contrast to the unyielding autocrat who had reshaped England's religious landscape through sheer force of will. Court records revealed the extraordinary measures taken to preserve Henry's remaining dignity during these final days. As bodily functions failed, teams of servants worked in shifts to manage the increasingly distasteful tasks of cleaning and moving the massive royal body. The ulcers on his legs had grown so severe that bone was reportedly visible through the necrotic tissue. The stench became so overwhelming that perfumed handkerchiefs became essential accessories for anyone entering the royal chamber, and windows would be flung open despite the winter cold whenever the king lost consciousness. By February 27, even the elaborate pretense that the king might recover could no longer be maintained within court circles. Archbishop Cranmer was summoned urgently to the royal bedside as Henry's breathing became increasingly labored. Contemporary accounts describe how the king, unable to speak, was asked to squeeze Cranmer's hand if he placed his faith in Christ rather than in the religious ceremonies he had once valued. Henry reportedly squeezed with his remaining strength before slipping into his final coma, a poignant detail often cited by Protestant historians as evidence of a deathbed conversion. The king died before dawn on January 28, 1547. Even in death, Henry's enormous physical presence dominated the royal chamber, his corpse a grotesque monument to excess and suffering. The official cause was recorded simply as natural decay, though modern medical analysis suggests a lethal combination of heart failure, sepsis from infected wounds, and complications from probable type 2 diabetes. More remarkable than the death itself was the extraordinary conspiracy of silence that followed, as the Privy Council suppressed the news for 3 full days while consolidating power around young Edward VI. This delay proved crucial in establishing a smooth transition of power. While Henry's body lay cooling in his chamber, Edward Seymour, Earl of Hertford and uncle to the new king, moved with ruthless efficiency to secure control. Secret meetings were held, key fortresses secured, and potential rivals neutralized before the public announcement of Henry's death on January 31. When the bells of London finally tolled to mark the monarch's passing, Edward Seymour had already been named Lord Protector and Duke of Somerset, effectively ruling England in his nephew's name.